One of the great pieces of shade I think we've seen in quite some time in the NFL was, I think it was in the 2015 season when somebody was talking to Bruce Arians or asking him a question, one of the reporters, after I think it was a Thursday night game between the Cardinals and the Rams. Bruce Arians said something to the effect of, "I don't know why everybody treats him like such a big deal with them going 7-9 every year." Savage. He put the St. Louis Rams on blast. And frankly, the Rams organization deserved to be put on blast. This is the same organization that sits there and wants to troll the Redskins by sitting there and going out with the coin tossed and having the captains for that game be all the players that they acquired from the picks from the RG3 deal. All the while, that whole entire time from 2012 on, the Redskins have actually made the playoffs twice, and we're in the ballpark of making it a third time over the span of 5 seasons, and the Rams organization has made it 0 times. So, ha ha ha, joke's on you. You trolled yourself because you're jackasses. So, you're thinking now, heading into 2016, the St. Louis Rams are moving. They become the Los Angeles Rams, and you've got a new city, which is the old city. Then you've got the new quarterback. You trade up big to go from number 15 all the way up to number 1 to pick Jared Goff. And you're thinking, new city, new quarterback. Maybe this is the start of something different from the Rams organization. Unfortunately, it didn't take into account the fact that Les Snead was still their general manager and Jeff Fisher was their head coach, and this roster was still incredibly underwhelming. The defense was somewhat underachieving, and the offense absolutely sucked. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know, so much for the 7-9 Rams. They moved to Los Angeles and they forget how to win even 7 games. This Rams team was terrible in 2016. 4-12. 2 losses to the San Francisco 49ers. I want you to think about this. A team that beats the Seahawks at least once every single year, and that's one of the few good things Jeff Fisher did as the Rams head coach, was find a way to consistently compete with the Seahawks and beat the Seahawks. They lost to the 49ers twice, including that embarrassing drubbing on the opening week of the season on Monday night, 28-0. The 49ers only won 2 games, and both of them were against the Rams. Oh, my God. And it's funny, too, because at one point in time, the Rams had some momentum. You're sitting there, even when they're sitting at like 4-5, you're like, yeah, they're not that far out of the mix. And then they proceeded, of course, to go on to lose their last 7 games of the year. I know a lot of people will want to sit there and talk about how much Jared Goff was a goof and he was a disaster in 2016, but this is part of the reason why you don't want to have Jeff Fisher around your young quarterback. Part of the reason you moved up that big to go up and get Jared Goff was because Case Keenum, Sean Mannion, they were not the answer. So, of course, Jeff Fisher, being the inevitable moron that he ultimately was, decided, hey, I want to start the season with Case Keenum. And then, of course, once things went south, now we want to sit there and bring Jared Goff in, and instead of giving him several games at the beginning of the season, potentially acclimate himself and maybe see some progress by the end of the year, he does all of his attempting to acclimate during the fire of the season, and of course it was a disaster. Deservedly, Jeff Fisher was fired. I don't care if they lost 5 games by 7 points or less. You also got to look at the fact that they lost 6 games by 14 points or more. Jeff Fisher clearly wasn't watching film. This is the same Jeff Fisher, I believe, during 2016 when referencing the New England Patriots, talked about how good Danny Woodhead looked on film, except for the fact that he played for the San Diego Chargers. Fisher was a disaster. The fact that Les Snead still has a job is astounding to me. But yet he does. And what a crap show the Los Angeles Rams were in 2016. Jared Goff looks like an epic bust, even 1 year into it. Todd Gurley saw a significant regression. The offensive line couldn't pass block. They couldn't run block. But other than that, they were just fine. Oh, my God. You had 8 games where this offense scored 10 points or less. 8 games in the National Football League. Half of the season, the Rams offense scored 10 points or less. How the hell does that happen? Even the 76 Bucks look at this offense and said, yeah, you guys suck too. And then their defense. You let Janoris Jenkins go in free agency. That's one thing. Of course, you franchise Trumaine Johnson to not give him a long-term extension. You've got Aaron Donald, arguably the best defensive lineman in all the National Football League, up to and including J.J. Watt. And you've still got a defense that has 7 games where they allowed 28 or more points. So the offense sucked, the play calling sucked, and the defense sucked, and the defensive play calling sucked. So it's not a big surprise to see that some big changes were made because enough was enough. This is not a way to reestablish yourself in an old marketplace by sitting there and stinking up the joint and regressing the way the Rams did in 2016. This had nothing to do with the move, in my opinion. This just had everything to do with this was just a bad football team with a crappy roster, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So lo and behold, the Rams go out and get themselves a head coach. And instead of getting a proven commodity or a very experienced coordinator, they hire 30-year-old Sean McVay, the offensive coordinator of the past couple of seasons for the Washington Redskins. An interesting choice. It's either going to do one of two things. It's either going to really, really work tremendously well, or it is going to be an epic face plant, and they'll be looking for another coach in 2 years. And mercifully, at that point in time, Les Snead will surely have been fired, because if McVay busts out, then that means that Snead blew 2 more drafts, and furthermore, that means Jared Goff would have busted out. Then why the hell does this guy still have a job? But a 30-year-old head coach. Now, you can sit there and make the argument that they did a good job of surrounding him with somebody with experience like Wade Phillips. I do question the logic of bringing Wade Phillips in only from the standpoint of the Rams personnel is really set up to run the 4-3. And your best player on defense is best suited in a 4-3. Now, granted, Aaron Donald is such a beast and a stud, it probably doesn't matter. You could play him as an edge rusher in a 3-4, honestly, and it would work. And if you think that he couldn't, you're crazy. Anywhere in that front 7, he could play. But he is best utilized as a 3 technique in a 4-3. So bringing in a Wade Phillips, how is this going to work in a 3-4? There's some reports in Denver that he was kind of turning the defense against the offense in the locker room under Gary Kubiak. So now do you want to bring Wade Phillips, an established senior defensive coordinator that knows what he's doing, to potentially entirely shake up the way this team does defense and potentially have the underpinnings of a guy who might want to undermine the young head coach? We'll see. It's going to be very interesting to see. But ultimately, the best thing the Rams can say is that 2016 is officially in the books. And it can't get too much worse for them. Yeah, it could, but for all intents and purposes, it can't get too much worse. And part of why they paid the price was for the RG3 deal and not really hitting as much as they'd like to think that they hit. And all the while, a few years later, they had to give up a whole buttload of ransom worth of picks in order to go up and get the guy who wasn't the number 1 quarterback in the 2016 draft class. Because that's how Les Snead rolls, bitches. But looking ahead to this offseason, the Los Angeles Rams have about $40 million in cap space. Priority number one. Now that he's 3 years through his rookie contract, Aaron Donald, you can negotiate with him. You can ink him to a long-term deal. The Rams must do it. Whatever you have to overpay him, you're not paying him enough. That is the number 1 priority. They may let Trumaine Johnson go in free agency, and if that's what you have to do, so be it. You have one priority in terms of your current roster in this offseason, and that is to get a contract done with Aaron Donald right here, right now. I don't even care if you are switching to a 3-4. He is too special of a talent to play any games with. He is too special of a talent to wait another year or two for him to potentially hit the open market, to where now you have to franchise him, to now where you have to pay him even more freaking money, or somebody comes in and outbids you for him. Aaron Donald must be re-signed. Then they have to decide whether or not they're going to pick up the 5th-year option on Greg Robinson. Oh, man, has he been an epic bust. 2nd overall pick in 2014. A lot of people, myself included, were wrong on his potential at the NFL level. He can't even play guard right now. He's terrible. But hopefully, maybe a new offensive system, a new offensive-minded philosophy. They can figure out whether he can play left tackle or right tackle, maybe left guard. But do you risk picking up the 5th-year option on Greg Robinson, knowing that puts you on the books for him for 2 more years in that 5th year? That's going to be a pretty hefty cap number for a guy who has shown you absolutely nothing that he could be any type of starter anywhere on the offensive line in the National Football League. It's another significant decision they're going to have to make. Like I mentioned, the Trumaine Johnson situation, they already let Janoris Jenkins walk in free agency. Are you willing to let Trumaine Johnson go? 2 pretty good corners, you let him go in back-to-back seasons and get really nothing in return. What, a compensatory pick in the draft? Doesn't matter because Les Snead will fuck that up anyways. What they really need to do, though, in the offseason, after getting Aaron Donald done in terms of a contract, no matter the price, is they do have to spend some money on the offensive side of the ball. Because again, because of the Jared Goff deal, this is a team without a first-round pick, and I believe this is also a team without a. I know they've got they just third-round pick. Yes, I'm absolutely right. They don't have a first or a third-round pick. They're going to have to supplement for the lack of draft picks by spending some money on the offensive side of the ball in free agency. Maybe it requires paying Alshon Jeffrey like a number one wide receiver. Honestly, maybe they go the route of getting somebody on a one-year kind of prove-it deal like a Michael Floyd. Maybe bring him back into the NFC West where he's familiar. Maybe he'd want to get some revenge on the Arizona Cardinals. But the primary focus, I think, for the Rams in free agency this offseason has to be the offensive line. Guys like TJ Lane, guys like Ricky Wagner. If you get a sense that Kevin Zeitler isn't going to be franchised by the Cincinnati Bengals, you go making a big bid for him. Because frankly, right now when it comes to that offensive line, they need upgrades everywhere. And at this point in time, it doesn't matter what skill you have on the outside, which they don't have much anyways, especially if they let Kenny Britt go in free agency, which they very well might. This is an offense that is really, really bad. At least one thing they could do to help improve things a little bit for their young quarterback and their young potential stud franchise-type running back is to improve the blocking up front on the offensive line. So they need to be very active in free agency, especially because it looks like Greg Robinson is a bust. They have to spend some money on that offensive line. Now, in terms of the draft, they might get a third-round compensatory pick or fourth-round compensatory pick for losing Janoris Jenkins last year in free agency, but right now, as it stands, they've got a second-round pick, a fourth-round pick, a fifth, sixth, and a seventh. So they've only got 5 picks in this draft. Good thing for them is the second-round pick is pretty high, and they're in enough of whistling range, I suppose, if they wanted to, especially if they do get like a third-round compensatory pick, they could take that second and that fourth-round pick and move up into the tail end of round 1. Now, what could they potentially be pursuing? Even if they spend some money on the offensive line in free agency, they got to spend some time on that offensive line in the draft. Tackle, guard, center, doesn't matter. It's all needs. Everything in this draft needs to be on the offensive side of the ball. I know you're bringing in Wade Phillips, which could potentially mean a new defense. So some of the personnel you have is not going to be a natural fit. But you have to trust at this point in time that Wade Phillips can coach these guys up and make things happen. If you're going into this draft and you draft heavily on the defensive side of the ball, then you haven't learned anything and the Rams can't figure shit out, which they probably can't. This has to be offense, offense, offense. You have to do everything you possibly can at this point in time to ensure you've given every opportunity in the world for Jared Goff to succeed. Drafting edge rushers, safeties, and corners is not the way to do that. Drafting offensive linemen, wide receivers, and tight ends is the way to go. That's what the Rams have to do. Because if they don't, in another year or two, we're really going to be clowning him for the Jared Goff pick and talking about him potentially being one of the biggest busts in the history of the NFL draft. Yeah, it looked that bad in 2016. I don't blame him yet, but if it doesn't start to turn around as soon as 2017, you really have to start to wonder why the hell they traded all the way up to do everything they could to make sure this guy shitted out in the league.